Welcome to How to Survive the Apocalypse. I'm your host, Ben Carter. In the chaos that followed, nations struggled to maintain order. The Great Reset, a seismic shift in global control, had begun. Cities transformed into ghost towns, the once bustling streets silenced into eerie stillness, with only the echo of emptiness whispering of a world that was. Power structures crumbled, replaced by a mysterious cabal that promised a new world order, a new beginning for civilization. The global economy was in freefall, markets plunged to depths unseen in modern history. Unemployment skyrocketed, and the very concept of work itself seemed on the brink of oblivion. Money, once the king of the world, was dethroned, replaced by digital currencies controlled by the unseen hands pulling the strings of this new world order. In the midst of this chaos, there emerged a new form of survival, a radical adaptation to the new rules. Communities forged alliances, pooling resources, and sharing skills. These pockets of resilience became bulwarks against the storm, beacons of hope in the dark sea of uncertainty. The Internet, once a global network connecting billions, was now a fractured landscape. Information became a precious commodity, traded in whispers and coded messages. The world was starved of truth, fed instead a diet of propaganda and misinformation by the powers that be. Yet, even in these grim circumstances, the human spirit found a way to push through. Secret networks sprouted, spreading information and fostering resistance against the encroaching control. Education, too, was not spared from the reset. Traditional schools vanished, replaced by virtual classrooms and AI tutors. Knowledge, once universally available, was now rationed, filtered through the lens of the new order. Subjects that once dominated curriculums were sidelined, replaced by a new emphasis on compliance, obedience, and acceptance of the New World Order. But amid the shadows, there were those who dared to question, to resist. They sought truth, pried open the secrets, and laid bare the machinations of the New World Order. These brave souls became the torchbearers of a resistance, a fight for the soul of civilization. The struggle was real, and the stakes were high. But in the face of adversity, humanity found a way to adapt, to survive. The Great Reset was not the end. It was a new beginning, a harsh rebirth into a world that was still struggling to understand its new reality. As the dust settled, the fight for survival continued with renewed vigor, fueled by the indomitable human spirit. And so, the story of the Great Reset unfolded, a tale of chaos, loss, and ultimately, of survival. As we delve deeper into the origins of the Great Reset, it's critical to understand the warning signs and early events that signaled this unraveling of the world as we knew it. The initial tremors started subtly, barely noticeable to the general populace. Economists, however, were acutely aware of these changes. The shifting sands of global finance. The collapse began with an economic recession that gripped the world. Markets tumbled, businesses shuttered, and unemployment rates soared to unprecedented heights. The control of wealth started to consolidate into the hands of a few, and income inequality widened like never before. Then came the environmental triggers. Climate change had been a looming specter for decades, and its consequences began to haunt mankind. Rising sea levels inundated coastal cities. Unpredictable weather patterns and extreme temperatures led to catastrophic natural disasters. The world was not just metaphorically on fire, but literally. Despite these clear signs, systemic changes were stalled by bureaucracy and corporate interests, further deepening the crisis. Simultaneously, social structures started to crumble. Trust in institutions dwindled as people felt increasingly betrayed by the political class. The fabric of society began to tear at the seams, fueled by disillusionment, civil unrest, and the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. The digital realm was no refuge either. The advent of advanced artificial intelligence and automation threatened job security, deepening the economic crisis. Privacy became a relic of the past, as mass surveillance became the norm. Personal data was harvested, bought, and sold, turning people into commodities, fueling the engines of this new world order. These triggers did not occur in isolation, but rather as a domino effect, each event exacerbating the next. The world was caught in a vicious cycle, spiraling towards an unseen abyss. And from this abyss rose the architects of the Great Reset, promising a new world order, a solution to the chaos, a light at the end of the tunnel. Little did the world know, the light was merely an illusion, a mirage leading to further darkness. Thus began the era of the Great Reset, a time of drastic change and relentless control. Yet, as we have seen, even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit remained unbroken, sparking resistance and striving for survival. This resilience would become the beacon that would guide humanity through the darkest hours of the Great Reset. As the Great Reset took hold, governments around the world found themselves scrambling to maintain control. Many failed to grasp the magnitude of the shift, caught off guard by the speed and intensity of the transformation. Nations that had once been stalwarts of stability and order were suddenly plunged into chaos. Law enforcement agencies, overwhelmed and underprepared for the sheer scale of the societal breakdown, struggled to preserve any semblance of law and order. In major cities, the streets became a battlefield. Panic set in as food supplies dwindled, essential services collapsed, and the economy spiraled into freefall. The veneer of civilization was stripped away, revealing a desperate struggle for survival. The world watched in horrified fascination as societal norms were discarded overnight. The once bustling metropolises, symbols of human progress, were now the epicenters of despair and lawlessness. The plight of the ordinary people was heart-wrenching. Families were torn apart, friendships strained, and communities shattered. Trust was a scarce commodity, replaced by suspicion and fear as survival instincts took over. Yet, amid the chaos, humanity's indomitable spirit began to shine through. People began to band together, forming pockets of resistance, communities holding on to the vestiges of their past lives while trying to navigate this new world order. But the architects of the Great Reset were unperturbed. Their plan was unfolding as intended. The societal breakdown was not an unintended consequence, but a necessary stepping stone, a way of dismantling the old world to make way for the new. With the world in disarray, they saw a blank canvas, ripe for their grand design. And so, they began to reshape civilization, molding it in their image. However, the human spirit is resilient. Despite the initial shock and confusion, people began to adapt. Individuals who were once passive spectators became active participants, spurred into action by the dire circumstances. Heroism emerged from unexpected corners as ordinary people stepped up to protect their communities, to feed their neighbors, to comfort the grieving. The adversity ignited a spark of unity and defiance. For the architects of the Great Reset, this resilience was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it threatened to undermine their plans. On the other, it demonstrated the sheer potential of a united humanity, a potential they intended to harness for their own ends. This precarious balance between control and resistance became the defining feature of the Great Reset, and in the ensuing struggle, the future of civilization hung in the balance. As the dust settled, it became clear that the first 72 hours following the Great Reset were critical. This initial period was a moment of reckoning, a baptism of fire that would forge the survivors into the architects of their own destiny, or leave them as mere footnotes in this new world order. Water, the essence of life, became the foremost priority. Clean, potable water was no longer a given, but a precious resource. With infrastructure crumbling, survivors had to locate natural water sources or devise methods to purify and store whatever water they could find. Rainwater collection, filtration systems, and even condensation traps became lifelines in this harsh new reality. Shelter, the next vital necessity, was not just about physical protection from the elements. It was about psychological security, a semblance of normality amid the chaos. Abandoned buildings, makeshift tents, underground bunkers, these became the homes of the post-reset world. The location of a shelter was just as critical, with survivors needing to balance proximity to resources with the risk of conflicts and exposure to potential threats. Safety, always a concern, was exponentially heightened in the aftermath of the Great Reset. The collapse of law and order meant that survivors had to adopt a self-preservation mindset, constantly aware of potential dangers. Some banded together for mutual protection, forming impromptu communities, while others chose the solitary path of the lone wolf. Regardless of the approach, every survivor had to learn the art of self-defense, often from scratch. Stability, the final and perhaps most elusive priority, was about finding a sense of routine and purpose within the turmoil. This was not merely about physical survival, but about maintaining mental and emotional well-being, establishing routines, creating order out of chaos, finding reasons to hope and continue fighting. These were the subtle threads that held the fragile fabric of society together. In the face of adversity, these priorities, water, shelter, safety, stability, became the guiding principles of survival. They were the compass points in a world that had lost its bearings, the anchors in a sea of change. Yet even as they clung to these basics, the survivors were unknowingly setting the stage for the next phase of the Great Reset. For in their struggle to survive, they were also laying the foundations for the new world order that was emerging from the ashes of the old. Resource scarcity was a harsh reality in the aftermath of the Great Reset. With traditional supply chains disrupted, survivors had to learn how to ration their supplies, extending the life of what they had while seeking out new sources of food and water. Food, once an abundant commodity, became a precious resource. Hunting and foraging became critical skills, with survivors learning to identify edible plants, track and hunt small game, and fish in local waterways. In urban areas, survivors turned to urban gardening, transforming rooftops, balconies, and abandoned lots into miniature farms. They salvaged seeds from fruits and vegetables, learning to cultivate them in makeshift pots and containers. The art of composting saw a resurgence, turning organic waste into nutrient-rich soil. Waste in all its forms became a resource to be exploited rather than discarded. Water, the elixir of life, posed another significant challenge. With infrastructure systems failing, survivors had to find ways of purifying and storing water. Rainwater collection became a common practice, with survivors creating crude but effective systems using materials at hand. Boiling, filtering, and solar disinfection were techniques employed to ensure the water was safe to drink. In the absence of power, survivors had to find alternative ways to heat their homes, cook their food, and light their nights. Fire became a vital tool once again, with survivors learning the art of firemaking using friction, flint, or even a simple lens. Solar power, too, proved its worth, with those who had access to solar panels or solar-powered devices having a distinct advantage. Currency, as we knew it, became obsolete. Without a functioning economy or financial institutions, survivors had to return to a system of barter and trade. Goods and services were exchanged based on perceived value, need, and availability. A person's worth was no longer defined by their wealth, but by their skills, knowledge, and ability to contribute to the survival of the community. Communication, too, was drastically affected. Without the internet, cell phones, or even radio, survivors had to rely on more primitive forms of communication. Messages were passed along in person or left in prearranged locations. Smoke signals, semaphore, and even Morse code saw a resurgence. Adaptation became the rule of the day. In a world reshaped by the Great Reset, the survivors had to rethink, repurpose, and reinvent to endure. This was not just a physical battle, it was a mental and emotional one. It asked of them not just to survive, but to adapt and evolve, to reimagine civilization from its very foundations. As the world around them changed, survivors faced threats, not only from the environment, but also from within their own ranks. Human nature, in all its complexity, was laid bare in the struggle for survival. The breakdown of law and order left a vacuum that was quickly filled by both altruistic community builders and less benevolent entities exploiting the chaos for personal gain. Looters and militias emerged swiftly. Driven by desperation or opportunistic greed, they preyed upon the weak and the unprepared. The concept of might makes right re-emerged, with brute force sometimes deciding who got what scarce resources remained. Communities had to band together, forming their own defensive militias to protect themselves and their resources. Disease, too, was a constant threat. Without access to modern medical facilities and pharmaceuticals, even minor injuries or illnesses could prove fatal. Sanitation became a major concern as the lack of waste disposal systems led to an increase in vermin and insect populations, both vectors for disease. Traditional methods of herbal medicine saw a resurgence as survivors turned to the natural world for remedies. The psychological toll the Great Reset imposed cannot be overstated. Many survivors grappled with grief, loss, and the constant fear of what the next day would bring. The mental and emotional strain brought on by the isolation, uncertainty, and constant fight for survival was immense. Cases of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder multiplied, and without access to mental health professionals, survivors had to find ways to cope on their own or rely on the support of their communities. The environment, reshaped by the Great Reset, posed its own set of challenges. Man-made structures crumbled, and nature began to reclaim urban spaces. With this came encounters with wildlife, some potentially dangerous, as displaced animals sought new habitats. The changing climate also introduced new weather patterns. Storms, droughts, and heat waves could devastate food supplies and make survival even more precarious. Survivors faced a daily gauntlet of threats, each one capable of toppling the delicate balance they had achieved. The Great Reset was not just a global event, it was a personal one, testing the mettle, resilience, and adaptability of each survivor. The struggle was not only for survival, but also for maintaining humanity, dignity, and hope in the face of overwhelming odds. In this world reshaped by the Great Reset, small groups of survivors had to navigate the tricky landscape of community formation, governance, and self-protection. The formation of a community was often a natural progression, driven by the human instinct for companionship and the practical necessity of cooperation for survival. These communities were typically small, consisting of a few dozen individuals at most. Their size was largely dictated by the available resources and the difficulty in maintaining order and cohesion in larger groups. Governance within these survivor communities often evolved from necessity and practicality. In the absence of larger institutionalized governments, leadership usually fell to those who demonstrated the ability to make sound decisions, manage resources prudently, and guide the community through crises. This wasn't always a formal, elected position. Many times, it was an informal role recognized and respected by the group. Trust was an essential ingredient in these communities. Without it, cooperation was difficult, if not impossible. Each member had a role to play, whether it was hunting, gathering, farming, building, or defending the community. The survival of the community depended on everyone fulfilling their roles and working together for the common good. This interdependence fostered a sense of trust and unity among the community members. However, trust was also fragile, easily shattered by deceit, betrayal, or selfish behavior. Defense was another critical aspect of these communities. In a world where resources were scarce and competition was fierce, protecting the community and its resources was paramount. Defense strategies varied widely, depending on the community's size, location, and available resources. Some communities fortified their living spaces, building walls, trenches, or other physical barriers. Others relied on stealth and mobility, constantly moving to avoid detection or conflict. Yet others formed alliances with neighboring communities, pooling their resources and strength for mutual protection. These alliances were often tenuous and fraught with tension. Disputes over resources, boundaries, or perceived slights could quickly escalate into conflict. The threat of betrayal always loomed, as communities could be tempted to break alliances for short-term gain. In such a volatile environment, diplomacy, negotiation skills, and the ability to resolve conflicts peacefully were as valuable as physical strength and combat skills. In the aftermath of the Great Reset, the struggle for survival wasn't just about finding food, water, or shelter. It was also about navigating the complexities of human relationships, building communities, establishing governance structures, and maintaining order and security. The survival of the fittest wasn't just about physical strength or adaptability, but also about social intelligence, cooperation, and the capacity for empathy and compassion. Even in the face of global catastrophe, human societies found ways to rebuild, adapt, and persevere. In the process of reconstructing civilization post-Great Reset, one of the critical cornerstones was the rediscovery and implementation of age-old survival knowledge. This was not only about the primitive skills of hunting, foraging, and fire-making, but also the more advanced knowledge about agriculture, renewable energy, and trade. The ability to grow food was a key determinant of a community's ability to survive and thrive. In the aftermath of the Great Reset, the importance of agriculture was re-emphasized, albeit with a shift towards more sustainable, organic practices. Crop rotation, composting, and the use of natural pest deterrents became common as communities sought to create self-sustaining food systems. In addition to food production, renewable energy sources had to be harnessed to power the machinery and technology that remained. Solar panels, wind turbines, and hydroelectric systems were scavenged, repaired, or created from scratch. This reliance on renewable energy sources not only met immediate needs but also helped to ensure the long-term sustainability of these communities. Trade, meanwhile, emerged as a crucial aspect of this new world order. While self-sufficiency was a common goal, it was not always achievable. Differing geographical conditions and resource availability meant that communities had unique products and skills to offer. As such, trading networks began to form, facilitating the exchange of goods and knowledge. The advent of these trade routes also enabled the spread of survival knowledge. Skills such as herbal medicine, water purification, and tool-making were shared between communities, fostering a sense of interdependence and cooperation. In an era where information could no longer be easily accessed or disseminated, the oral transmission of this survival knowledge became a vital lifeline. Amid all this, the human spirit proved to be a formidable force. Resilience, creativity, and the ability to adapt were just as important as tangible resources. The capacity to learn from past mistakes, to innovate, and to think beyond immediate needs, these were the qualities that allowed humanity to survive the Great Reset. This period became a testament to human ingenuity in the face of adversity, a testament to the will to survive and to not merely endure, but to rebuild and flourish. In the aftermath of the Great Reset, it was not the strongest who survived, nor the most intelligent, but those most responsive to change. This was a time of transformation, a forging of a new world from the ashes of the old, a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the human spirit. As the dust settled and humanity began to rise from the ashes of the Great Reset, new systems of order and ideology began to take shape. These systems were born out of necessity, molded by the challenges of survival in a drastically altered world. They represented the collective will of the survivors to not only endure, but to thrive, to build a future from the remnants of the past. Emerging powers, often formed from the remnants of the old world's institutions, arose, filling the power vacuum left by the fall of the previous global order. They were driven by the need to maintain order, to coordinate resources, and to foster cooperation among the disparate communities that had sprung up. These emerging powers were not universally accepted. Instead, their influence waxed and waned, contested by local communities resistant to centralized control. Such resistance often stemmed from a deep-seated suspicion of large, overarching authorities, a sentiment born out of the failures of the past. These micro-societies, shaped by the unique challenges and resources of their surrounding environment, often developed their own distinct ideologies and systems of governance. Some communities, for instance, adopted a form of direct democracy, where every member had a voice in decision-making. Others leaned towards meritocracies, where leaders were chosen based on their skills and contributions to the community. There were also those who favored a more anarchic system, shunning hierarchy altogether and advocating for complete individual autonomy. The clash between these differing ideologies represented the struggle for humanity's future direction. The survivors of the Great Reset were not merely passive recipients of change. They actively shaped and reshaped their societies, testing different forms of order, control, and ideology as they navigated the post-collapse world. Religion and spirituality, too, underwent a transformation. For many survivors, the Great Reset shook their faith in old belief systems, prompting a search for new spiritual anchors. Some turned to the natural world, seeing in its resilience a source of spiritual strength. Others turned inward, seeking enlightenment through meditation and introspection. Still, others sought solace in communal rituals, finding comfort in shared belief and collective memory. Amid these complex dynamics, one truth remained consistent. The survivors of the Great Reset were not merely surviving. They were redefining what it meant to be human in a radically altered world. From the ruins of the old world, they were building a new civilization, one that reflected their hopes, fears, and the lessons learned from the past. In this brave new world, the power to shape the future lay firmly in the hands of those who had survived the Great Reset. In the aftermath of the Great Reset, amidst the ruins and the rubble, the survivors found themselves staring into the abyss of an uncertain future. The world they once knew, steeped in order, predictability, and control, had been swept away. What remained was a blank canvas, riddled with challenges and opportunities alike. It was a brutal, unforgiving environment, but it also bore the seeds of transformation, of rebirth. It was the beginning of a new epoch, marked by resilience, adaptability, and evolution. The survivors, driven by an indomitable spirit, found ways to thrive in this unfamiliar landscape. They found strength in their collective memory and used the lessons from their past to build their future. They pushed the boundaries of their adaptability, redefined their ideologies, and reshaped their societies. They were not just surviving, they were learning, growing, evolving. They were learning to live again. In the grand sweep of human history, civilizations have risen and fallen, each one leaving its mark, its legacy. The survivors of the Great Reset were no different. They too were building their legacy, a testament to their resilience and their indomitable spirit. Their story was one of survival, but it was also one of innovation, adaptation, and transformation. But through the lens of the Great Reset, it becomes increasingly clear that survival is not just about enduring the immediate aftermath of a catastrophe. It's about learning, adapting, and evolving. It's about reshaping societies, redefining ideologies, and reimagining what it means to be human. It's about looking into the abyss and finding the strength to build a bridge across it. It's about finding hope in the face of despair, unity in the face of division, and resilience in the face of adversity. In the end, the survivors of the Great Reset were a testament to the remarkable resilience of humanity. They stood as a reminder of the fragility and, at the same time, the endurance of civilization. A reminder that even when the world ends, survival is not just about clinging to life. It's about forging a new path, a new civilization, a new humanity. It's about understanding that the essence of survival is not just about enduring change, but embracing it, shaping it, and learning from it. Because when the world ends, survival is not just about living, it's about thriving. Thanks for listening. This has been How to Survive the Apocalypse. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.